We're going to keep doing it until it works, but it never really has. Now, you're not going to see the housing you built for the rich on the waterfront, because that's not where you build housing. You see a nice high school there. But you go in not too far, you see some of the nicest housing ever built in Manhattan. Built for the rich, but the rich didn't show up, and the bottom fell out of the real estate market, taking down the whole economy with it. It's kind of like what happened in 2008, but back then they used fussy words like recession. This is called the Panic of 1907. But in that panic, one guy kept his head. His name was Philip Payton. He was an entrepreneur selling and renting his own people. Word gets out in the Black Press that there's a place for home where you can live, and actually with cheaper than other places in the country, and better as well, because nice housing. And it starts slow, but it builds and builds, so you get what we call Harlem becomes the possible black name for the world. Now, there's some historians try to define the Harlem Renaissance in the 20s and 30s, and that's certainly a high watermark, but I don't think you can define it. For one thing, there's elements of it this day, but also Philip Payton was like a generation before that. And the symbolism was early too. Already by World War situation, they were half of the medal of the war in the Apollo Theater, which is one of the big events on stage, but it's the one that survived. It's come back from COVID, and they just announced a major expansion too, and they're still doing amateur night on Wednesday night. But now look over the right. This is our first look at the Bronx. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's not
would
a
have
great
had to go there the first night.
You know, I was talking about how bad the waterfront of Manhattan used to look. This gives you some idea. And we're going to see where they're improving it along the way, but we're like a generation behind where Manhattan is, and we're at that point where things get worse before they get better. But we are working. It doesn't last too long, let's say. Let's say we'll dispute with the locals. But after he was gone, nobody else was up here for a while. So where are you going? Oh, I'm going to the Bronx in front. The Bronx is really here. I understand we had over 300 companies making pianos in the early 20th century. Everyone had a piano. I mean everyone. I have an old one-bedroom apartment. There's a one-fitted piano if I got one in there. We call it a piano wall. Yeah, everyone had. We're down to one company in Queens. Steinway still neighborhoods anymore. They've been replaced by new housing. And we're still looking at a pretty grungy waterfront, but you see where new things are going up. This waterfront's going to get better looking before we're done looking at. But also appreciate, we're just looking at the outer fringe of the Bronx here. Bronx is a big place. Geographically, it's the size of Paris. And already 25% of its acreage is parkland of one sort or the other. And that includes like Pelham Bay Park, which is the biggest park in all the 5 boroughs, 3.5 times the size of Central Park. But Van Cortland's a bigger park than Central Park. Now, when the Yankees started in New York, they weren't known as the Bronx Bombers. They weren't even known as the Yankees. Okay, this part of the history is obscure, so you start to see peeking out there. So they moved up here in the early 20th century from Baltimore, and they got a stadium up in Washington Heights, the next neighborhood up. And when you see Washington Heights, it'll be obvious why they were known then as the Highlanders, hilly up there. The thing to remember is by the 1940s, New York City was blessed with 3 terrific baseball teams. So the Yankees are doing better than ever. The Giants are still doing well. Look at the Dodgers finally doing well. We don't need to talk about their early history either. But they kept doing well so much that through the 40s and most of the 50s, by the time you got the World Series, you've been 1, if not 2, New York City teams. But those other 2 teams, as strong as they were, are always in the shadow of the Yankees. So first was the Dodgers, like Brooklyn, 1957 for Los Angeles. Less than a year later, the Giants lead the Polar Bears for San Francisco. Then we're down to 1 team. That's not enough for New York. So a couple of years went by. We created a new baseball team. The New York Bears are doing regular walking tours. There's no secrets, no shame. They still have the brochures. That's the Cross Bronx Expressway. They don't let you walk on the highway. Although heavy traffic might be faster. But I wonder, like this bridge, which I call the other Washington Bridge, because yes, it's confusing. We have 2 bridges named after the same person. But it's the older 1885 Washington Bridge. That's walkable too. And I'll tell you, every other bridge we've gone under is walkable out of Manhattan. Yeah, this is where Manhattan really lives up to its name of Land of Many Hills. Because there are streets in Washington Heights so steep the sidewalks have staircases.
I mean, I saw it.
And the original grid plan project. Let's enjoy this bit of pastoral glory here. I'm going to take a break on the mic. And I'll get on by the last bridge on the Harlem River and get back. But meanwhile, everyone's at the bar waiting to serve you. Snack bars below. I'll be going around. I'm Andy. I'm the tour guide. Wearing the green shirt that says tour guide. If you got any questions, comments, don't be shy. But this bridge used to have a different name for the different location. So around the bend, we're going to go onto the Broadway Bridge to see the towers. And when we go over it, you might see a subway train go over, the number 1. When they came up with the idea of sending the subway over the train, that was the Broadway Bridge. But that was going to hold the subway, so they had to build a new bridge for that purpose. But why waste the old bridge? So, but that's not the last feet of that grid. Now, I emphasize the word that grid, because there are other grids in like Brooklyn and Queens. They have their own story. I'm talking about the grid plan descended from that original grid plan of 1811. And this is the thing, even though that was a plan for Manhattan, we knew the city would probably expand beyond Manhattan. Before the Brooklyn Bridge, we never thought it would go east, though. We just thought it would keep going north. And it already was. See, before, but the fact is, by the time we checked back with the Dutch, we had messed up the spelling so bad that we're still not sure what we were trying to say. And what the Dutch called the Spider Diamond was really a different waterway. Now, like the one we're going to go on, it went from the Harlem River to the Hudson River, separating Manhattan from the mainland. But their waterway was like, I find this beautiful, because you know what, if you ask me what the northernmost neighborhood of Manhattan is, I'm going to say Inwood there on the island. But there's a neighborhood ahead of us there in the Bronx called Marble Hill. That's the chunk of Manhattan. And those people won't let go. They still insist they're part of Manhattan. We humor them. Street, this is level 2, is Broadway. So this is Broadway. Now Broadway, our most famous street in New York, longest street in Manhattan, and really longer than Manhattan. How could that be? Well, it's not a straight line, it doesn't follow the grid. And that's because, oh, there goes the number 1 now. That's because Broadway is also the oldest road in New York City. Older than the Dutch. I mean, Broadway's an anglicized Dutch, it was Manhattan. Now, they probably did that. The thing is, we have better documented instances where they did it in other parts of the region. So that's what the Dutch did. But we only have one line of letter that says we have secured the island in exchange for 60 guilders worth of goods. It was never $24. That was some American story didn't know it was 60 guilders. Boathouse and the practice field. So Columbia's here too. And Columbia is New York City's member of the Ivy League, our most prestigious group of colleges in America. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, UPenn, Brown, Dartmouth, Cornell. You have to measure more when Cornell gets really ticked off. And that's the cream of the crop of American universities. A distinction I find ironic, because you know what? Ivy League was formed in the 19th century as in the 21st century. But in the 20th century, Columbia losses by a college football team. A record took more than 4. Well, basically, the ocean comes crashing in over what wasn't just a plain river. But it also rips through that terrain, rips through that foundations or palisades. And this is the Palisades. Now the Palisades actually go all the way to Jersey, and after they struck it rich, they moved to New York City. You know, had a big impact on the place too. Now the Rockefellers like to travel. The Rockefellers heard they've converted this old estate, the buildings of the estate, into a park. They said that would be the perfect setting for our collection of medieval ruins. Because the cloister is not one monastery; it's actually several monasteries. 20 Bridges Cafe. Give the staff to turn around. They got the whole list on there, guys. You know about the movie, Homeland for PR article, didn't hire the right guys and consultant in the region. So with that, not only does not this thing get started, but it's scrolling ever since. Well, look to your left now. You see under this great gray bridge, there is a little red lighthouse. Now that was there before the bridge, a good 10 years before. Understand, we didn't have the piers up here, but we had the boat traffic. One of the biggest port in the world. You know, back to Old Virginia, so all he went. We didn't want to lose Grant too, he's actually on a bill. So we cleaned up the tomb, fixed the bar, off working. So as we got bigger and bigger, and these are bigger, we had to come with a new system of water. And so we put water tanks on top. We're going to force the water up there, and then it's going to sit, and eventually just open the tabs and gravity will bring it back down. Bigger, a little fancier, finally, just go to most of your apartments. This waterfront thing's working out fine. And I don't want to leave New Jersey out because they went through much the same cycle. So let's just call that Bergen County because it's too many little towns in detail. But Bergen County, like Hudson County, all part of the Port of New York. Now people live there, but up on the cliffs, up on the Palisades. No one lived at the waterfront. And when the port went away, that was all abandoned waterfront. And by the 80s, not only was there still no one living there, you couldn't even walk there. But then he built the Weehawken Port. And that turns out to be the key. You build a fort, you build around it. You build enough, you build another fort, build around it. You just keep doing it over and over again without fort by fort, where you're building that whole waterfront all the way back. When Flight 1549 landed there, January 15, 2009, what we call the miracle on the Hudson. So that's not where the plane was supposed to land, no. That was a routine flight out of LaGuardia Airport, supposed to go to Charlotte, North Carolina, but right after takeoff, both engines are taken out by a vicious gang of Canada geese. Yeah, Canadians, please, take the geese back with you, they've been a problem. And they were a problem for the pilot that day, Chesley Sullenberger, or Ferry. I know the movie, they're the only boats on the scene. That's some deal they cover with Clint Eastwood. That's not really how it works. There are lots of boats on the scene, including Circle. In fact, that boat, the Manhattan, was the third boat on the scene. Now, it didn't go to the planes to get passengers. It was bringing the EMTs from Rescue 1 from the base in Hell's Kitchen on.
The blow dryer back. You know, with you, with your bags and stuff. Then, we're only going to this